Hey PlayStation Universe, thanks for tuning in for another E3 2016 coverage and reaction video. We're talking about For Honor this time, Ubisoft's slasher brawler set in medieval
I don't know if it's
feudal
an RPG.
Viking times.
I was gonna say action adventure game.
I think that's probably the best way to categorize it, as an action adventure game with a really robust,
heavy combat focus.
Yeah, heavy combat focus, really robust dodging, blocking, stance switching system. So you actually got to play an extended portion of the game, a tutorial chapter and a meaty gameplay chapter.
Yeah, the part that we saw from the conference that they showed. But yeah, I got to see the tutorial part before.
So what struck you about the gameplay? Because I know that was probably the most impressive aspect.
For gameplay, just how every movement you made and every decision it just felt really intentional and purposeful. Mm-hmm. It didn't feel so arcadey or so gamey as I expected it to be. It felt like a lot of that had to do with the exaggerated animations that they had with the characters, where it really felt like you were committing to everything that you were doing, and you had to react.
And you had to some extent. I mean, you're swinging around these massive axes, massive clubs.
And you have the light and heavy attack, and I almost always went with the heavy attack just because it was the trigger, and it was just easier to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. What struck me about watching you over the shoulder playing it is that it really has this three-way sort of stance-changing system, and that's the way they complexify combat by saying, okay, in this world and in this time, the way that you would have scored hits on your opponent is by putting yourself in such a way that your attack comes from the bottom right or from above. And if your opponent isn't already standing in a way that prepares them for that, they're not going to be able to block it. And so that's where you get some of that purposeful switching.
Yeah, pretty much is exactly how that works. And one of the things, it always feels like you are, it feels like you're in danger, like pretty much the whole time. So it's like, it feels like you're really engaged in combat, not just like there's a bunch of enemies around and you got to try to plow through and and still have some health by the end. It's like, no, things can go south really quickly if you're not paying attention, especially like if you get hit, there's a kind of a jarring experience where you do get hit, and it feels like if you're not careful and still trying to read your opponent while this is happening, and then they'll get in like 3 more hits on you, and then you're have a sliver of health left.
It's also easy to get overwhelmed. I know it's easily. In one part of the demo, you were chasing on top of these castle walls a few smaller foes.
Yeah, and it didn't seem like there were that many up there. I was like, oh, okay. And then there were just like
there's
10.
9.
I was like, oh my god. And then
you held your ground for a decent
while,
amount of time.
And then it was too much after a bit. Then I redid it and got through pretty quickly. But
I think as a narrative thing too, what's cool is that you're going to play different sides throughout the course of the game. Like you've got different warring factions, and they're conflicting with each other for one reason or another, so you'll get to stand on both sides of the battlefield.
Right. And that's what's most interesting to me, is that we got to see the single player mechanics being shown off really for the first time this extensively. I don't know if they did talk about it before. It was multiplayer mainly.
That was at least the way it was introduced,
but that there is really a solo campaign that you're running through, and there is a story behind it. You didn't get to hear any of it because I had the headphones on, but the tutorial part at the very beginning of the game that I got to play was you play as the knight, and you can select like this different styles of outfit, which is kind of nice, just add a little flavor.
Yeah, for sure.
But there was this interaction where you were in a fortress that was being attacked by another group of knights, and then they're coming in, and then you fight, and then the two commanders like talk to each other. Your enemy commander stops the fight and tells the other guy that you work for, basically saying like, we don't need to kill any more people. Let's do trial by combat to stop shedding any more lives and all that stuff. Okay. And the guy just was like, combat with you would be a death sentence or something. And he's like, well, fine, I'll use my first best or whatever. And then and then you get pulled in as the other guy, and you're just some random dude. And then at the end, you fight, and if you defeat the other guy, then the enemy commander comes over to you and says like he will not have his highborn commander or whatever be killed by a lowly mercenary. So he pulls you aside, and then he knights you. And then once that's done, he basically just like tells you that you have to come with him now.
Now you're in this war.
Because he knighted you, and then everybody just like lets it happen. It was like this weird like For Honor, like really is like the name of the game. So to see how that will play through and the dynamic that it will create,
and sort of the feudal responsibilities that you might feel to the commanding authorities above you, and how that plays
and it was all an external. Well, the knight didn't have any dialogue. The one that I played as, but the Viking sure did that I played as later. But in that first part, it was one of those classic narrations of like, it was like the enemy commander that was narrating the first time, and then like at the end, after you get knighted and start walking around, It's just like, and that was the day that I met the warrior or something like that.
I see.
And so like it was this story that's building up to kind of more current events.
Definitely.
So interesting time jumps.
And to add flavor to that campaign, that story, it's certainly a visceral game, a violent game. Anything from chopping a guy's head to chopping his groin to shoving them off of walls.
Yeah, the combat is extremely creative, like in the animations and how you can, especially with like the little guys, you don't have to lock. So that you do lock onto them holding L2. For the bigger enemies that you have to like really, you have to do the stances for, but there's a bunch of little guys that you just kind of hack through, and the flow of animation actually is really unique and interesting how they do that for some of the encounters, but. Just one of the finishing moves, if you defeat an enemy, half the time there'll be a prompt that's you press square or triangle very quickly. After then, you'll perform an execution, and that will restore some of your health after beating them, which is really, really key. But just the whole night thing where he's just like fighting and he hits, and then all of a sudden he flips his sword around and then he jabs like the edge of the hilt like right into their collarbone and then just pulls it out.
And of course he's got these heavy plate gauntlets so you can actually hold the blade and use it like that.
Yeah, the first time I saw that I was like, did I see that right? And I was like, oh my god. And it was
for sure.
Yeah, it was just really cool. So
creative animations
and unique abilities for the different warriors too.
Right.
So that was
different
a key,
feelings and
very,
stuff.
very important thing. So
and they had a different weight to them.
Yeah,
sort
for
of
how they
swings
fought
and stuff.
So I didn't get to play as a samurai, which I would just presume is much faster because of the type of weapon he's using, and the enemies that you fight as the Viking are generally quicker than you are.
Yeah.
But the knight, if you press square twice when you're near an enemy, if you press it once, you'll do like a block break and kind of knock them up, and then you can get in for hit. With the knight, if you press it twice, I think you just kind of knock them down. I think is how that worked.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember how that one was.
Yeah,
all I can think of is the Viking.
Flavor.
The Viking one was really cool, and you see it in the trailer where it's just you knock them up, and then he charges and rushes, and you can either like push them into spikes, and then it'll be an instant kill. You can just chuck them over walls,
off the castle wall. Yeah,
or you can just like knock them into another wall, or just if it's an open area, you'll just like throw them down on the ground, and they'll get stunned, and then you can get in for a big like heavy ground hit and finish off.
I think it definitely seems like a unique flavor for an action adventure game to have such a deep layered combat system that has that sense of urgency, and it's also got cool cinematic set pieces too.
And
I mean,
cool.
it's just an epic game.
And I actually really impressed the dev too accidentally at the beginning of the tutorial, because there were two knights and you can only lock onto one enemy at a time. So I was locking on, but I knew this other guy was going to attack, so I just really quickly, if you tap L2, it'll switch between them. So I was up ready to block the one guy, and I blocked him, and I tapped L2 quick, and I was going to try to anticipate, and I ended up blocking, just going ting ting, and blocked both of them. I was like, oh, I was like, I really get this. I was like,
Danger Will Robinson,
no
step
idea
up to the plate.
Yeah, so I mean, there's really cool moments like that where you do get surrounded by people if you're not careful, and you really can, if you're good enough or if you're just lucky enough, you can just become a total badass and just like block everyone off, and then just like get in some really big area attacks.
Awesome. And as far as we know, we got a bit to wait yet, right? We heard 2017. Beyond that, I think it's just a game that's really going to appeal to action adventure fans who are looking for a deeper combat system. Something that's going to test your hand-eye coordination, of course, your reflexes, but also your on-the-fly thinking, because every moment does count.
And that's something that's always been a huge criticism of a majority of action games in the past, is that they become too button mashy.
Yeah, they become flavorless.
It's not, you can't do that in this game. No. You really can't button mash.
Awesome. Well, refine your skills, and you too can be Viking.
Yes,
or samurai.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for sharing, Will. Those are our thoughts and impressions of For Honor, Ubisoft's latest action-adventure melee brawler.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's strike true. Yeah. Thanks for watching all of our E3 2016 coverage. There's plenty more to consume on our site. We're going to bring you more previews and coverage as the days post E3 go on. Thanks for watching.